Hi, welcome to Actify Chat, Communications, Happenings, and Trends. I'm your host, Amanda Cumming, and today, in honor of Women's History Month, I wanted to provide a top 10 list of women-led movements throughout history. Now, there are names in this list that I will inevitably butcher, and I do apologize for that in advance. And with having said all of that, let's just get started. Number 10, food riots throughout Europe and Russia, and also the Americas. So it's important to note that both men and women have participated in these types of food riots throughout various times in history. However, as E. Thompson during the 18th century argued that many food riots were either made worse or started by women. During the 18th century, women participated in or began food riots in Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. Additionally, approximately 1/3 of the food riots throughout the American Revolution were started by women. Number 9, the Rojava Revolution. An ongoing conflict that began in northern Syria in 2012, the revolution is notable due to the role played by women. Women have been both instrumental on the battlefield and within newly formed political system and overseeing that political system's implementation. Due to the civil war in Syria that really intensified in Aleppo in 2012, a Kurdish minority group previously repressed by the Syrian government gained the upper hand in Rojava region with little conflict and casualties. Majority Kurdish cities were able to take control over their governments, changing the social and political landscape. The Constitution of Rojava was created, guaranteeing cultural, religious, and political freedom of all people. It's fascinating to see this women-led democratic cooperative in an area of the world where women tend to have very little to no rights. Number 8, the Russian Revolution. In 1917, female workers spread the idea of a general strike on March 8th for International Women's Day. Hundreds of women lashed out during this time. They threw rocks, snowballs at factory windows, and they even dragged male workers out into the streets. The women also attacked police stations, but the police refused to shoot because many women during that time actually did have their children with them. As Leon Trotsky later wrote, the women took hold of the soldiers' rifles and beseeched, almost commanded, "Put down your bayonets and join us." Remarkably, due to women's involvement, the centuries-old Tsarist regime, after 5 days, had collapsed. Number 7, Black Lives Matter. So according to a recent study conducted by Washington University of St. Louis, while the odds of being killed by police when unarmed were about the same for black and white males, the high percentage of unarmed black women killed significantly increased the risk of being killed by police while black and unarmed. Founded by 3 black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, they brought the issue of police brutality experienced by the black community to the forefront of public consciousness. There was a huge social media campaign that used the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Supporters of the movement have since carried out hundreds of demonstrations, sometimes attracting thousands of demonstrators across the United States and around the world. Racial tensions in the US remain at normal levels, if not increased a bit. And little to nothing has been done to prevent these kind of attacks by police against unarmed people in the United States. Number 6, reproductive rights and the fight for safe, legal abortions. This year marked the 45th anniversary of a landmark court decision guaranteeing women the right to safe and legal abortions in the United States. Women's rights activists have been fighting for legal abortions for hundreds, if not thousands of years. However, based on ancient texts and artistic depictions, it is generally believed that abortion was a legal practice in the Greco-Roman world and was conducted by midwives or exceptionally practiced laymen. There were some notable exceptions. In the case of when a wife was pregnant at the time during which a husband died, and the resulting pregnancy would have produced the only heir of the deceased husband. It really wasn't until the 19th century that attitudes began to shift regarding abortion, making it an increasingly unacceptable practice and even punishable by law. Abortion wasn't always illegal in the United States. It wasn't until 1821 that a statute was created in the state of Connecticut, criminalizing abortion, and by the 1900s, every state had outlawed abortion. In the late 1960s and early 70s, a woman who later went by the alias Frode for the purpose of this case on abortion sought the help of an attorney after she was denied access to an abortion in the state of Texas. She continued to fight the state for safe and legal abortions, a fight that ended up in the Supreme Court. In a landmark decision in January 1973, the Supreme Court affirmed that A woman's right to decide whether to continue her pregnancy was protected under the constitutional provisions of individual autonomy and privacy. Unfortunately, the reproductive rights of women is still a battle that is waged throughout the entirety of the United States, even today. Number 5, the Rosenstrasse protest. In 1943, in response to what is known as the final roundup of Berlin's Jews, in which the Gestapo detained an estimated 1,700 to 2,000 Jewish men in a welfare office in Rosenstrasse, their wives, the majority of whom were not Jews, protested outside of the building until authorities were forced to release these men. It is widely believed that the Third Reich refrained from utilizing straight force to assure these men's executions. They did not want the populace at large to know that they were executing Jews instead of simply deporting them. So this protest is particularly notable in that it was the only mass protest by German citizens against the deportation of Jews. Number 4, the Women's March on Versailles. So the Women's March on Versailles was one of the earliest and most notable events of the French Revolution. It started with a woman in the marketplace of Paris who, on the morning of October 5th, 1789, were near rioting over the high prices and scarcity of bread. Their demonstrations became intertwined with others who were seeking liberal political reforms and a constitutional monarchy in France. Eventually, this march grew into a mob of thousands. Encouraged by revolutionaries, they also ended up ransacking the city, including armories. They subsequently marched to the Palace of Versailles. So the March on Versailles was revolutionary. It began all of the events that occurred that ended up changing the balance of power in France. Number 3, the Montgomery bus boycott. Blacks were arrested, harassed, and even shot for refusing to move to the back of the bus. Arguably, this boycott began with Claudette Colvin, a high school student who was subsequently arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger, claiming that it was her constitutional right to sit wherever she pleased. Rosa Parks would do the same thing a few months later, and she too was arrested. The Women's Political Council was founded in 1946 by a group of African American women college professors. They frequently discussed the idea of calling for a boycott due to the large number of complaints that they received as far back as 1953 concerning the mass transit system. They finally felt the time was right to call for said boycott when Colvin was arrested. The boycott was ran and led by women and is echoed by the National Women's History Museum. Women not only represented leadership in the movement, but they also handled the day-to-day planning for protesters. At the end of nearly a year-long protests, the Supreme Court upheld a ruling of the lower courts stating it was unconstitutional to discriminate on public transit. Number 2, the women's suffrage movement in the United States of America. Initially led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and then led by Susan B. Anthony, the women's rights movement in the U.S. began in 1848 by a group of mostly women abolitionist activists who met in Seneca Falls, New York, to tackle the issue of women's rights. Their sole purpose was not only to assure equal voting rights, but also to assure equal social and economic status of women throughout the United States. The movement was mostly successful, and by the 1920s, women gained the right to vote as assured by the 19th Amendment. By the beginning of the 1900s, more radical voices had joined the movement, such as Alice Paul, who had pushed for an equal rights amendment to the Constitution. This equal rights movement never did happen in the United States. Number 1, the creation of society itself. According to studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, they show that their strong sense of moral community is maintained by a group of individuals who resist any form of personal domination. In fact, many hunter-gatherers are so egalitarian and communistic that anthropologists argue that hunter-gatherer societies, those first human societies, must have originated in uprisings against dominant males. Anthropologists theorize that any uprisings were most likely led by women looking for collective support to ease the burden of child rearing. This theory comes from a plethora of evidence in anthropology, biology, and archaeology, but it's not been 100% proven. Only time will tell. I thought it was pretty badass of a theory nonetheless. So if you liked what you saw, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Please visit our Patreon page and help support us further.